Oh, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed your break. I know it's been a long day, but we have saved the best till last. I don't know about you, but my ears are still burning from that last panel. That was absolutely fantastic. So, our final panel with the current FIFA apparently not fit for purpose. Our final panel today focuses on what can be done. Does FIFA need root and branch reform, and if so, in what areas? Or is it just too late for the game's governing body in its current form? Do we need an entirely new organisation to look after the game of football in the 21st century? Furthermore, how to address the wrongs of the past, and in order to restore trust in FIFA, should we revisit the 2022 World Cup vote? It's probably a little bit too late for Russia 2018. To offer their thoughts, please welcome our esteemed panel. First of all, Greg Dyke, former Director General at the BBC, ex-chairman of Brentford, and who was instrumental in setting up the Premier League during his time at London Weekend Television. He later became FA chairman, a post he held for 3 years. In 2015, after the resignation of the German FA boss Wolfgang Niersbach over alleged corruption in the bid to secure the 2006 World Cup, Dyke said, "It's like the Archers. It's like a soap opera. Every week something's happening. You begin to be convinced that no World Cup has ever been allocated without a pile of bungs." Please welcome Greg Dyke. Secondly, Benita Merciades, who is a corporate affairs practitioner, sports administrator and author. She was head of corporate and public affairs with Football Federation Australia and a member of the senior management team for Australia's 2018 and 2022 World Cup bids until 2010. She was revealed, despite promises to respect her anonymity, as one of the FIFA whistleblowers when interviewed for the Garcia report, and has since written her account of her experiences in Whatever It Takes, the inside story of the FIFA way. Although much of the FIFA scandals have been attributed to Qatar's winning of World Cup hosting rights, Merciades said only last week, "I think Russia are lucky Qatar won." The joke in relation to the Garcia report is that when they trotted off to Russia, they said, "Oh, sorry, we can't help you because we leased our computers and we've thrown them out." This is a country that put a dog in space in 1959 and they can't back up their computers. It beggars belief. Benita Merciades. Thirdly, Philippe Auclair, or Louis Philippe, to give him his stage name. He's a French singer-songwriter, musician, news correspondent and football journalist. And like every good Frenchman living in London, he loves cricket. He's been English correspondent for France Football since 1999 and can be heard regularly on the BBC and TalkSport. He has won awards for his biographies of Eric Cantona and Thierry Henry. And writing in The Blizzard in 2013, Auclair opined that the landscape which FIFA's super cop Michael Garcia discovered in 2012 was an unholy tangle of corporate dysfunctionality and plain human wickedness. Philippe Auclair, ladies and gentlemen. And last but not least, Louis Saha is a 20 times capped French international striker who played with distinction for Metz, Newcastle United, Fulham, Manchester United, Everton, Tottenham Hotspur, Sunderland and Lazio. He won 2 Premier League titles, was part of the squad for the UEFA Champions League winning team in 2008 with Manchester United, and was part of the French squad that reached the 2006 World Cup final. These days, he runs his own company called Axis Stars, and in 2016, he wrote in City AM, "FIFA requires much more than a change of leader. Its governance structure needs to be fundamentally reformed. My main concern is that the reform proposed will not do the job. It may be a start, but the fact that there's so obviously a package of easy pickings, compromises, concession and missed opportunities is further evidence, if any more were needed, that FIFA is not capable of reforming itself." Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Louis Saha. So, a heavyweight panel. We're expecting heavyweight answers. I want to ask you all collectively, first of all, very simple question. After what we've heard today, given your own experiences down the years, do you believe that corruption is endemic rather than individual within FIFA? Who wants it first? Benita, I knew it'd be you.
The short answer to that is yes, and I'll tell you why. When it comes to an organisation like FIFA, you've got process and you've got culture. And what Fatma Samura has done since she's come in is introduce process. She's a United Nations bureaucrat, so she has a policy published here and a process published there, and there's a Human Rights Committee reporting here, doing reports after report after report. But it hasn't changed the culture, because the FIFA politicians are elected the same way, they're elected on the same basis. Gianni Infantino is doing the same sort of thing that came out of the Sepp Blatter playbook. And when you've got process versus culture, culture wins every time. And until that issue is addressed, FIFA won't change, the member associations won't change, and the confederations won't change.
Greg, was that your experience of FIFA during your time, particularly with the FA? If so, any examples?
Yeah, I think you've got 40 years of corruption in FIFA, and therefore it was embedded, and people didn't even see it as didn't even see what they were doing as corrupt. But I do remember Jerome Valk saying to me, you'll have to excuse the language, saying to me one day, he said, you know, football will always be corrupt. And I said, why? He said, because it's run by men. And I said, well, explain. And he said, well, if you put £1 million on the table and you put a naked woman in the corner, a man will always take the £1 million and fuck the woman. And I thought, this is the guy who's running FIFA. Yep. But if that's what he believes is endemic in FIFA, then what chance? And I think you're dead right. The culture of FIFA had been embedded almost since the time it was taken over by the Brazilians. And I couldn't see you changing that without massive change.
Is it endemic, Philip, because essentially the associations are dependent, or many of them anyway, maybe not England or the big Western countries, but a lot of them are dependent upon FIFA money. So it's that cultural process, isn't it? We need the money, you've got it.
It can certainly contribute to that. But I think it would be dangerous to think that the bigger countries, the Western countries, are not subject to the same corruption within as federations from lesser countries or less fortunate countries or less rich countries. And that this culture that Bonita is talking about and that Greg is talking about is something which you don't just see within FIFA in Zurich, but you also see it in confederations. You see it in federations. You see it in club organizations, because you shouldn't forget that if we're talking about governance, you cannot talk about governance in 2018 without talking about the other side, which is not the federations, confederations, and FIFA, but also the clubs associations, the interest, I would say, the TV networks. It's all part. The culture is absolutely everywhere. It's there in the French FA at every level, and Sir Louis agrees with me here. It's there even in the way we cover football in the media. Corruption is not just about money. So the culture, unfortunately, I'm afraid, has seeped down so much that it makes it very difficult to imagine. There is no absolute, there is no way that you're going to have a magic wand and in one go, you're going to get rid of a few people and everything is going to be all right. No, it needs a systemic change.
Louis, you smiled there when Philippe mentioned the French FA with it. I mean, you can speak about that if you like, but it's clear to me from that response that you've experienced this culture as well, even as a player.
It's really hard to say that, drag into any stories. We can hear it. We can, as a player, be sometimes affected in a way that you hear, I would say, a story about corruption, but you don't have any effect, and you are a bit fatalist in a way that your job is only to play, and you want to be involved, but you really don't know how. We don't really have any doors to talk, and I think that you have one other sportswoman here who are committed to have a voice, but it's really, really hard. So yes, we may see on papers, we may see on media certain things that we want to change. We want to be involved to address a different message, because we have that power, we have that following, but we don't know how. So the actual power of having the press investigating and try to bring the stories and have like a concrete, I would say, solution. We are a bit far from it. We obviously talk about it, but we don't have any solution. So that's now the stuff about searching. It's like how to implement the true solution.
I want to pick up on that before we move on to a much bigger question about the Qatar World Cup in 2022. And I asked this question of Hope Solo in an earlier panel this morning. Do players not realise, well, I'm sure they do realise the power they have in both the media and with the public at large, the football fans all around the world? And if so, if they recognise these problems, why is it so few appear to speak out, particularly during their playing days? Maybe it's a little bit easier when you retire because you're one step removed from it. Is that the reason? I mean, as I said this morning, if you have a Cristiano Ronaldo or a Leo Messi or a Neymar that came out and spoke very openly and passionately about these subjects, surely the change would come quicker, wouldn't it?
I think so. The thing that we don't give them the platform to do that. So, which is the fault of the media, or which is the actual cliche that a sportsman bring? You know, it's like, oh, he's not allowed to be, political, or he's not allowed to have that voice because he have to be professional. He's playing by whatever people will say.
Footballers should just play.
Exactly.
Just play.
Some extent will allow them to do adverts or do something like this, but it's in line with whatever campaign UEFA is going to do or FIFA. It's really difficult. Even your manager or agent will tell you, no, in terms of image, nowadays is even more critical, so you have to be really careful or whatever you do. So during the time you're playing, you're in line as well. So you better be concentrated because they can bring you up, but they can bring you down. So you have to be aware of that. So right now, that's what Hope is doing and we're doing is trying to collect the actual information, try to understand it and analyze the right way, and make sure that basically from whatever has been said, we have a voice now. So let's try to open the doors, try to obviously change the ways who has been like corrupting our sport, because we have a duty to I think at some point show that to the youth. I'm telling you about my own stories, like my children now is like playing basketball. Nothing to do with football, but now he's taking I'm sorry for the language, but he's taking the piece and saying, oh, you footballers, you diving, always corruption, always this and always those stories. Hang on a minute, my son, hang on a minute. You should not do that. And why? Because we allow this platform. We should be, as ambassadors, having the tool to show another message. And this is the actual work of FIFA. This is the promotion of our sport. So there is something wrong here. So I'm addressing and trying to bring anyone who's trying to bring transparency or integrity to the fight. Let's
deal with the elephant in the room. The vote in 2010 for the Russia and Qatar World Cups was, as we know, the catalyst really for all that's followed and the crisis that's followed for FIFA. Is there enough evidence, in your opinion, for the cup to be taken away from Qatar and for the whole process to be rerun? It's a big question. The floor is yours. Philippe, you get first go.
I don't think so. I don't think it would be a good idea. I might surprise you by saying that, given that I've spent about 5 years of my life being in absolute pain for the Qataris and investigating what happened before and since then. You've got to be realistic here. I mean, we're talking about taking away a World Cup, and the thing is that you've got to do that legally, obviously. You're not going to suddenly say, well, we think that there is a burden of evidence which shows that the process was corrupt. I think we probably all agree that the process was corrupt and that very few, if any, organizing committees were not guilty of some kind of trespassing, so to speak, some more than others. But you've got to respect the process. So who would take away the World Cup? That's the question that I'm asking myself. Who would take away? There was a moment where you thought something might happen. I think at the time when we had the revelations about what happened between Mohammed bin Hammam and Renal Temari, which seemed to be a direct implication of a Qatari official into the voting process itself. But then it was found by FIFA that this didn't constitute a serious enough a breach and so forth. And the rest is a lot of evidence which shows that the process was wrong. But again, you could not just take it away like this. And it's more a question of trying to make the most, I think, the best out of a bad deal. Unfortunately, the vote 2010, we cannot stage it again, I'm afraid. That might be a personal opinion, perhaps also because I think of all that could be, that could happen if that box was open again.
Bonita, is Philippe right? Is it too late?
No, I don't believe it is. And I, for one very important reason, FIFA has to deal with its past. We all have things in our past that we have to deal with, and FIFA does too. And what they've tried to do is say, well, that was in the past and Sepp Blatter's gone and everybody who was on the executive committee who made that vote has gone, but the issue hasn't gone. You only have to read the Garcia report. And my country, Australia, was one of the worst treated in the Garcia report, fairly, because we did some bad things. But so was every other country, including Qatar. And here we are, we're going to roll up in Qatar in 2022, and yet FIFA hasn't dealt with its past. And FIFA hasn't really looked at what are the issues that are outlined in that Garcia report. And as someone, I'd say probably one of the few people in this room, if not the only person in this room, who has talked to the Swiss authorities and talked to other authorities about these issues over many years, I'd have to say, what the hell are you doing, guys and gals? The only guys I met in those investigations. It's been going on for years. I know 9 terabytes of data is an awful lot of pages, but when you look at what has come out so far via the US authorities, and everyone says, well, that's about the confederations in South America and North America and the Caribbean. Sorry, anyone who's worked in football and doesn't think there are issues within the Asian Confederation or within the African Confederation or within UEFA or within Oceania was born yesterday. And there are issues to deal with, and someone needs to call on authorities to investigate it, deal with it. And I don't think, as a person who's grown up loving the game and a person who played very badly, and as a person who's been a fan my entire life, I don't think we can have any confidence or trust in anything that happens within FIFA unless they deal with their past, and until we can be confident that the decisions they take in the future are based on merit and based on evidence.
Greg, I remember watching you on television when you were still the FA chairman in 2015, and Sepp Blatter won the vote, controversially, to remain as FIFA president. Didn't last very long, of course. And I remember a TV camera being pushed in your face, and you said, yeah, he won, but it's over. It's over. But it's not, is it? Even though Blatter has gone.
I think I said it's not over yet, which meant that although he'd won, I didn't think he would sustain.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. But even I didn't believe it would be all over by the following Monday, which is when he announced he was going. Unless someone's got a smoking gun and it's suddenly revealed, the World Cup in Qatar will take place. When you look back now, it's inconceivable. I mean, who on earth would give a World Cup to Qatar, a country that had no tradition of football, a country where you couldn't play the World Cup at the time they wanted it, where it didn't have enough cities, where, I mean, it's just inconceivable that they could do it. And of that 24, I think it was, on that committee, 18 have now had to step down because of allegations of corruption. So, I mean, but FIFA's terrified of taking it away and finding themselves in the courts. And I suspect the evidence isn't strong enough to win in the courts for FIFA. And therefore, if the evidence came out, if more evidence comes out, you could see that things might change, but the evidence isn't there yet, certainly, to take it away. And of course, the closer you get, the harder it gets.
Bonita, you alluded to the Garcia report. I know that you believe that there are still things in that Garcia report that people really haven't investigated, probably haven't looked at very closely. I'm sure you're the same for, in fact, everybody on this panel. Why has it been such a whitewash? Even when it was revealed, you know, in full in Built, and then FIFA released it, probably because they had to. And yet still there isn't that forensic examination that is going to force FIFA at least reassess what went on in those days. It's almost like it's been banked, put in the library, boom, done.
The idea of the Garcia report in the first place, and I write about this in my book. I don't want to put in a shameless plug for it, but
Very good, by the way.
It's terrific.
the idea of the Garcia report in the first place was to Blatter at that time wanted to take the World Cup off Qatar, and he wanted to do that because of pressure put on him by people from Australia, and who had undertaken their own investigation involving people who had formerly worked in the CIA and all sorts of organisations. But Blatter was then convinced that that would be a very bad idea to take it off Qatar. One, for the legal reasons that Greg mentioned. Two, that beIN Sport had made a $100 million production contribution, which meant that FIFA got an extra $100 million production contribution if the World Cup was held in Qatar in 2022, as, by the way, the US networks have done in relation to the US for 2026, to be fair.
Yep.
So there was that shift. Someone who met Garcia, had conversations with Garcia on 5 occasions and met him personally twice, once in New York and once in Sydney, there was a shift in his whole demeanour. And it was really clear that he had almost, he was a consultant lawyer, that's what he was. And anyone who's worked with consultants or has been a consultant know that basically what you do is you deliver on what the people who are employing you want you to do. And Garcia was a consultant lawyer who had a job to look at taking the World Cup off Qatar at one stage, which is why Phaedra Al-Majid, the Qatar whistleblower, was witness number 1. And then he was later given different instructions. And you could just see he sort of had shut up the shop of his inquiry. And why haven't they wanted it? And then you look at the absurdity over Russia, as I said in the quote that you mentioned. They put a dog in the moon in 1959, but they can't back up their computers. And that's even though Edward Snowden's living in the country and he knows a lot about backing up computers. So, there was absolutely, FIFA doesn't want to look at the Garcia report and all the things it contains because he has a lot in there because it's too uncomfortable for them. And because there are issues around, we're 2 weeks away from Russia, that couldn't be taken off them. And there are issues around the legal issues in relation to Qatar. So it's a really uncomfortable.
And Infantino, when he got the job, I think quite fairly said, OK, we'll draw the line now. And there's the period before me and there's the period after me. And even he, I think, quite quickly realised you couldn't do that. That actually, the corruption
It was too deep-rooted?
It's so ingrained. It's so ingrained in FIFA. Go along to the next FIFA Congress and go to that little desk in the corner. And that little desk is where they give out envelopes of cash.
You saw that?
Yeah. Everybody knows it. We could have got it. Everybody can get it.
Did you take one, Greg?
No. Luckily, the English, which is why I'm not sure I agree with you about the smaller countries. I think there's an issue about the smaller countries. I mean, the truth is, you go around you get the Turks and Caicos Islands in, and they get the same vote as Germany or France or Italy. That's nuts. It is nuts because it leaves you. And this is nothing about Turks and Caicos, I shouldn't have used the example, but it leaves you open to corruption. Because a lot of those football associations only survive because they get money from FIFA. And therefore, the idea that they can hold the management and the leadership of FIFA to account is ridiculous. They can't.
It has to be said, though, that, for example, the attribution of the 2012 Euro to Poland and Ukraine was tainted by some very, very poor, shall we say, behavior and extremely strong suspicion that the vote was actually skewed and bought. So we shouldn't forget that.
Yeah.
And the other thing, the argument that goes, Greg, what you're saying is, of course, yes, you wonder, why should a country which has got 360 million inhabitants and 10 million people who play soccer have the same vote as Montserrat or whatever. And the answer to that is not because Bill Gates is worth 15 billion that he should have a vote which weighs more than the guy who doesn't earn the minimum wage. And if you don't have that, you can think there are all sorts of systems. You will have to weigh one thing against the other. Is it really the reason why there is such a problem of governance in football? I'm not so sure.
No, but the fundamental problem is they're not answerable to anybody. If you're running FIFA, once you've got elected, you're all powerful. You're not answerable to anybody. You can buy anybody you like, except the big
I disagree with that. I just mentioned Germany 2006. I'll just mention Garcia report. Google, Franz Beckenbauer, Fedor Radman, Andreas Abold, and they're German. And Germany's the World Cup holders in the men's tournament. So the idea is to, if you believe in democracy, that it's one person, one vote, it's one country, one vote. And you don't fiddle around the edges with who gets a vote. What you do is you change the culture of the organisation. And the way you change the culture of the organisation is completely start again. Because, I said it back in 2015. What happened when Sepp Blatter left, everybody said, oh, FIFA's saved. FIFA wasn't saved. It was just changing the deck chairs on the Titanic. And, Gianni Infantino, I've met him once, and I don't know, he may be a good man, but he's got the same political pressures that Sepp Blatter had as president of FIFA. He wants to be re-elected. How do you get re-elected? You hand out more places at a World Cup. You hand out more development funds. The playbook hasn't changed. And, to say that the smaller countries, we have found this so far with the US authorities, with their investigations in relation to what's gone on in CONCACAF and CONMEBOL. But as I keep saying, I don't think, at least I hope that they haven't even started in relation to the Asian Confederation and the African Confederation yet. And there's certainly, if they're looking at issues to do with Germany 2006, Garcia said it to me quite clearly in relation to the Australian bid. We're going back to Germany 2006 and we're looking at what those people did in relation not only to 2006 but 2010, the Club World Cup, and also what they were trying to do with Australia.
So how do we change that playbook? Big question.
We've got 28 minutes.
Yeah, we've got 28 minutes. We could just
solution.
spend it all on that question, to be fair. I said to somebody earlier on today, I won't name him, but here at the conference, maybe it needs United Nations intervention. He said, well, you think the United Nations are free of corruption as well? So how do we change it, Louis? You got any theories?
It's a quite a difficult question, and to find the answer is like, do anybody, any organization has a business plan? Something like you can say, let's say, what is the deficit? What is the story that has been there for how many years? Let's take that as debt. It's like, and what is the actual solution that I mentioned before, and say that we have all a plan, or we have all kind of ideas and implement that in an overall project. I don't hear it. So everybody is like talking and say, basically, we should remove, we should change, we should this, but do we have a plan that we can all read and say, oh, we should be implementing this and not? Because now, as a population, everyone is like kind of scared, I would say. That's my opinion, because it's a mess. It's like it's too big. Like when I hear like 2 years ago the regulation about the FIFA agent, I couldn't understand. I say, hang on a minute. It was already really hard for players like me to understand who was there for me, who was the proper agent, or who was the one who is like taking advantage. Imagine in this little circle of a situation was difficult. They deregulate the agent. So it means like a barman can be an agent and say that he can take care of your affair. So all this is like as a small example how difficult to change an overall project is running pretty much everything. We're talking about security. We're talking about Qatar. Maybe they have an island. How you can like thinking about hosting a competition where maybe if something wrong happened, you have to, I think, make sure that people can save their life, and they have the solution of taking the car, for example. This is not possible. It's like it's an island, It's like security. It's one security. There is like finance. There is like a lot of like image in terms of social network and all that. So there is a lot of project in once, So to find a solution, there is like we need to have an organization able to really write a plan and like a business plan and saying this is going to cost this and this is going to take that time, that many people, and this is the thing that is missing. No one has any view about how to do it, because it's like, yes, we pointed out the problems, we say this is wrong, but that's the only thing that are here.
Do we have to do, Philip, as Benita suggested, and simply rip it all up and start again? I heard mention, I think, a couple of years ago of, even a new name for it, the World Football Union or something along those lines. But how to do it and how to get people in who are clean-skinned?
Well, now the problem...
That's not to say that everybody within FIFA is corrupt, of course, because
No,
that's not true.
no. An additional problem is that there had been a timid but genuine effort at reform, actually when Blatter was in place. And all the very timid little steps which had been made, FIFA has gone backwards. That's a personal opinion. I think it's gone backwards in terms of the ethics committee, in terms of independence of audit of in terms of transparency. It's extraordinary. It's even more opaque than it's ever been today. So you're wondering, okay, so what should we do? If we get rid of FIFA, what takes over? Some kind of, the Swiss government takes over the organization.
God forbid, they didn't even join the United Nations till 2002.
Yeah. So what do you create another body, which is a possibility, but that means you have to have the assent of the federations and the confederations. Difficult. And as well, as I say again and again, you cannot think of federations, confederations, and FIFA without thinking about the clubs, about professional football. And all of this is complicated by the fact that the amount of money which is now being moved about in football is incommensurable with what was the case even 10 years ago. That on top of that, you've also got new interests moving into football, being equity funds or being nation states and all the rest of it. So it's one, I'm like Louis, I think it's one big mess. And perhaps transparency would be a start. Let's put it, transparency of process would be a start. And maybe by changing the process, but changing it really, you can actually change the culture. If the process is adhered to really strictly.
Correct.
It's not going to change. The only change could come about is if the big football associations, a dozen of them, got together and said, we're not having this anymore. Because and if they got together with the sponsors, it's over, because all the money that came out of the World Cup will be gone. And that's the opportunity. And I think if Blatter had stayed, that might have there might have been those discussions. But I mean, you needed, I mean, where's the money? The money comes because of those big football associations playing in a tournament. They could have changed it. They never had the nerve to do it. Never had the nerve to do it.
Did you sense during your time with the FA that there was the will building amongst the big FAs of Europe at least to do something like that?
There was certainly a will amongst some of the FAs in Europe that something had to be done. But I think Blatter going, as you say, sort of picked the balloon, really. But there certainly was a will that something had to change. This couldn't carry on because it was so blatantly corrupt.
And ladies first.
Thank you. Let's not forget too that Blatter, when he first started on the whole idea of reform, he had Placido Domingo and Henry Kissinger and I think it was Johan Cruyff on a good governance committee, and he hadn't actually told them beforehand. So let's not idolise Blatter too much.
No.
But I mean, to answer your question, I think a few things need to happen. I go back to what I said earlier. You cannot deal with the future or what you've got currently unless you deal with the past. And FIFA have tried to sweep it under the carpet. They've tried to maintain their victim status with the US and Swiss authorities and say, we're good guys now. We've done these little reforms. We've got a few women on the committee, and it's all hunky-dory. And oh, by the way, we're still going to have our major marquee tournaments in Russia and Qatar. So unless they do that, and if there is evidence that shows that something went wrong, then we have to look at rerunning that. That's what it's like to deal with the past. And then in terms of having a future FIFA, it may be completely different. I mean, we don't have to be hung up about confederations and member associations and what we've got now. We need a new model. And what I would like to see is a model that's driven by fans and players, because they are the true stakeholders of the game. The sponsors and the broadcasters come along and they're just means to an end. But the people who really count are the people like Hope Solo and Louis Saha who are out there on the ground and make us want to go there come rain, hail or shine. And the people who really count are people like me who are members of my A-League club. Most of you probably haven't heard of the A-League, but members of my A-League club and people like me who volunteer and have volunteered for a grassroots club for every weekend of my life since I was about 14. They're the people who count, and they're the people who can drive the change. And I don't think we can sit here on a panel in the 28 minutes and 9 seconds that the time was when you asked the question and come up with an answer, and nor should we have to. But what we should be doing is encouraging others to come up with that answer. But it's the necessary 2 steps first. Deal with the past, and then let's get on with the future.
Okay, sorry, Louis. Yep.
Hello. I very like this idea, and it's not because I'm involved and I'm an ex-player, but I think that she's right. The actual power, the social impact of those stakeholders are not taking. There is no much voice, you know, and this is like a pity because we have like the following. I think that's now you see a player like Cristiano Ronaldo who's got more than 100 million following. I don't think it's used properly. The way that he can really emphasize whatever change. They have technology, they have like the digital with like a very strong tool to make changes. So bring that kind of transparency, whatever organization who really wants to change things, who really have that kind of power, whatever ideas need to be brought in that table and brainstorm. And the digital to spread that actual words and ideas to actually get a concrete solution. That's basically what I'm trying to do, and I'm really passionate about it. And what I hear about those voices is we're all here because we want that. It's like it's been there for the banking world. It's been there for the insurance. Everyone has been asked to be transparent. Even if you hide some kind of £1,000 anywhere, they get the police straight away, or the tax authority is going to be behind. But this big organization have the luxury to have the time to decide to be clean or something like this if this is wrong.
Okay, before we move on from accountability and transparency, which we've devoted a fair chunk of this chat to, I just want to ask you, Louis, one final question on Qatar. If more evidence was to come to light, particularly with regarding bribery, corruption, would you be then in favour of rerunning the votes, personally?
Yeah, it's a very hard question. It's like when it is like vital for security, vital for integrity, yes, it's something that you need to be brainstormed and need to think about it. It's depending on the evidence. It's not something that you can throw and say yes or no. I think that it have to be really something a danger, because I think so many people are already worked on building things, and I think that you have to and gonna make all that changes. So you have to be really big information put on the table to make that kind of decision. As Philippe just mentioned, I think it's not even on the card right now. So I don't think so.
Okay, I want to move on to a slightly different theme. We heard some very eloquent arguments earlier on today about human rights abuses in some of the nations that have hosted major sporting events, particularly World Cups, football tournaments. And we heard as well about the LGBTQI arguments. I want to pick up on a slightly different theme, that of racism and the rise of the far right in Europe in particular at the moment, and how it relates to football. Recently we saw crowds in Russia, the World Cup host, in a couple of weeks' time, racially abused a couple of your compatriots, Louis, Paul Pogba, Ousmane Dembele, and N'Golo Kante during a friendly in St. Petersburg. And I know that FIFA, in fairness, is investigating this, but in 2016 it actually disbanded its anti-racism task force, saying the job is done.
Yeah.
Is it?
It's a joke, simple as that. You know, it's ongoing work. It's going to be a really something that overall could be white, could be Chinese, could be black. Racism is not about your color. It's everybody. Even white can suffer that. You know, so that kind of message from a massive organization is wrong. I can't stand those things. It's too easy because they don't feel it as much. If it were a black minority guy who felt it, he won't say something like this. So this is a pity to hear such a thing. I do think that there is a lot of things, and Greg has done a great job with the FA and with the Premier League. I do feel like it's been really a good example. I come from France, who is way harder to see those efforts. There is Italy, Spain have suffered a situation like this on a regular basis, and I do think that English League has been an example. Even maybe on a lower league, it's maybe different. It's an ongoing thing. You can't see things and say it's solved. It's not true. It's society is very divided on this.
Are you, the rest of the panel, are you equally concerned that perhaps we might see this rear its ugly head even more during the coming World Cup, and are FIFA doing enough?
I think if you do, FIFA have to crack down very, very hard. I mean, I remember, you know, I'm an old guy. I remember 40 years ago I stopped going to Chelsea because I couldn't stand the racism in the crowd. 40 years later, it's not there. It's all sorts of things have happened. Partly it's the arrival of people like you, and it's the arrival of a lot of black footballers. It's very hard to be racist if your best footballer is the star is black. So that changed it, but also Kick It Out and the other organisations in Britain really did bring pressure on organisations like the FA to change it, and I think it's happened. But I think in this World Cup, I suspect you will see racism amongst some of the crowds. And if FIFA doesn't crack down on it very hard, very quickly, it could get worse. And you've got to come in and bang down.
They have to really be committed. This have to be strong.
Yeah.
And as a given, again, an example, if you have an agent, because this is my word, so I explain precisely what I know. If agent has not been sanctioned, they will do it again. And it's basically, it's not acceptable. Point. It's like, yeah. So if FIFA is like trying to do something like a regular sanction, believe me, they have to stop. Basically, they can't do it again. And unless they do it, they're going to be acceptable.
So we're starting to move towards the sort of FIFA that maybe we'd like to see, and that's clearly one area that needs a lot more attention focused on it. Philippe, I wanted to ask you about the FIFA goal programme.
Yeah.
Which is seen, rightly or wrongly, as being a key way in which FIFA exerts control upon the voting. I want to ask you if that's a key area of reform that is absolutely necessary for FIFA as well. I think it was Mark Peath from the University of Basel who wrote a report on the programme in 2011 saying 26% of all FIFA funding goes that way, and that the programme was run, I don't know if it still is, by 6 people, all appointed by the president himself.
There were things that you could say, the program in itself, when you look from the outside, you think actually that's pretty good. Let's have projects, initiatives.
Looks like a very worthy thing from the
Lots of worthy things. We're going to build the pitch there. I mean, there's a famous example, I think, of Pakistan, where they were the beneficiaries of something like 7 or 8 goal programs, and I think 1 pitch has been built, something like that. I mean, there have been, again, the problem is in the transparency and the way that the process is controlled. Because once you give the money to the federation, that's it. This is where your responsibility ends, and therefore you open the door to all sorts of misuse of the money. And you can also understand that as being more or less a bribe, to be honest. Even if there are some countries where the gold projects have been extremely positive, it's always been there to be used as a tool for corruption. So. Again, it's the process which has been found wanting, and the culture took over, to use Bonita's words.
Yeah. Greg, the next FIFA Congress in Moscow in June, will deal with this proposal by Gianni Infantino to expand the World Cup to 48 teams, tabled by the South American associations. They want an expanded FIFA Club World Cup as well. I think Infantino has probably admitted defeat on getting expansion to 48 by 2022, which he did broach in public a few weeks ago. And also they'll choose the next host of the World Cup in 2026.
Perhaps.
Perhaps. Do you have any faith in those processes, the way things are?
I'm not close enough to it. Now I'm no longer chairman of the FA. I'm not close enough to actually follow it, really.
So that's a good straight bat. Philip would appreciate that as a cricket fan.
No, to me, come on.
Forward defensive.
There's no point saying things about things that I'm not involved in or I didn't see. So I have no idea. It worried me that they changed the system of allocating the World Cup so that everybody gets a vote. And that I sat and thought, I'm not sure that will take out the corruption. I mean, what might take out the corruption is the amount of publicity there's been about the recent allocations. But I'm not sure giving everybody a vote, everybody has a vote, and that could leave it open to more corruption, not less.
It didn't help the Olympics, did it?
No.
And they all voted. And I mean, the only thing that would help really make a decision about the World Cup is to get back to those two words of merit and evidence. And the only people who you could really have any confidence and trust making that decision would be a completely independent panel, which does look at the criteria, which does assess the bids based on a whole range of issues which are of importance, such as capacity, whether they're a football nation, whether they have the financial wherewithal to do it, what their human rights record is like. There's a whole range of factors that should be important to FIFA, to fans, to players, as well as other stakeholders. But take that independent. I mean, there are people around the world who are very, very good at assessing those sorts of things, but you don't need to be in football. It's not rocket science. You don't need to be in football to make that assessment. Which gets back to your earlier question, if more evidence came to light about 2022, I think the answer was partly, well, it depends what the evidence is. I disagree. That's a bit like saying you're a little bit pregnant. Something's either not right or it's right. And that's the problem with FIFA. They've been allowed to get away with sort of sweeping the half-right stuff under the carpet and getting away with that. And so, if you found out, for example, that another bidder had broken the law of a third country, e.g. Australia, doing surveillance on a bid member, that's breaking Australian law. Yeah. It's breaking privacy laws. And I would hope that that would be something that not only FIFA would be concerned about, but so would in that case, the Australian government and the Australian FA, et cetera, et cetera. So, let's say another bidder did that to a third country bidder. That's corrupt. That's breaking the law. If there was evidence of, one of the things that when I met with Garcia, he said, well, do you have evidence of bank accounts? Well, no, because I wasn't the finance person. I was the communications and corporate affairs person. But it didn't stop the fact when I said, look at what we did with Jack Warner, $500,000 ended up in Jack Warner's personal bank account. So just because there isn't that sort of smoking gun type stuff, how much smoking guns do you need when you read Garcia? How much smoking guns do you need when you look back at the decision regarding 2006, 2010, 2014, 2018, 2022? I traced them in my book. All of those decisions, forgetting 2014 because there was only one bidder, all of those decisions, every single FIFA executive committee, at least 14 or 15 of the people who made those decisions in every single instance has been banned, suspended or indicted. And we're talking about the culture not needing change. As I say, you cannot talk about a future FIFA and how football should look unless you deal with what you've got now and unless you deal with that past.
But if football's not prepared to do that, and clearly it isn't to any great level, then who does it? Is it government?
Hello, authorities. Yeah. People like me have talked to the authorities and given them the observations, given them things that they need to look at. They have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of bits of evidence. Let's let them do their job. And as Andrew Jennings said earlier this morning, I mean, Andrew Jennings, who is the oracle of FIFA corruption after all, says they're coming. Well, bring it on, I say.
They did come. The difference has come when the cops
The FBI.
descended on the Borlak, and that certainly has made a big difference. By the way, a little bit, you know, Bonita's book is fantastic. There's another fantastic book on the subject, which is Ken Bensinger's Red Card on this, which I'm reading at the moment. Wonderful companions, these two. But you have to, when you look, you were talking about the Congress on the 30th of June. There's an old FIFA trick here, which is being used. We're talking about, you know, if you look at the agenda, proposal, you know, to bring the number of teams playing in the 2022 World Cup to 48. Who is proposing it? The individual president of federations from CONMEBOL, that is from South America. Excuse me, really? No, it's Gianni who wants a way to get this proposal through because it would serve his plans to his grand scheme of things. So, hello Alejandro Dominguez. Maybe we could talk together and see how this can be arranged, and then somebody else does it for the president. This is the way FIFA works.
Yes.
And it's carrying on working. And that is what is, honestly, just on the face of that, you think, that's a joke. We know that the vote for to designate or not designate, because the delegates at the FIFA Congress can also vote for none of the above, which would reopen the bidding process. The whole thing will probably take 3 minutes. I'm not joking. Everything will have been dealt with, agreed, in the hotel rooms. Greg knows more about this than I do, and Bonita as well. In the ante-rooms, in conversations. Come the day, there would be absolutely there would be artificial transparency, and also with voters who will have been subjected to more political pressure than at any other time in the history of FIFA.
Yeah, I described the Congress as, to the House of Commons Select Committee here, as it reminded me of North Korea. You know, the leader said that there's a set number of people who are all picked out to go up to support the leader, vote, that's it, go on.
So it's all a done deal.
Yeah.
And which gets back to culture.
Yeah, which is where we came in. We've not got much longer to go on this particular chat. I just wanted to round out by asking you about another thorny question. The FIFA Ethics Code and the Ethics Committee, which has been all over the media, it seems, for about the last 15 years. We've seen this week that a 5-year ban issued to Warawai Makudi of Thailand, who was one of the voters on the EXCO for that 2010 vote for 2018 and 2022, for forging documents and refusing to cooperate with the FIFA investigation, which I can only assume is the Garcia report. Is that correct, as far as you were aware? It's been reduced by 18 months. Now, there doesn't seem to be, as far as I can make out, any particular explanation as to why on the FIFA website. I mean, is this acceptable? Are these decisions just arbitrary, that they go, well, let's shave 12 months off? Any clues? Donita?
The short answer is yes. And that's the point. I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, and hopefully some of you are old enough to know what a record is in this room. But
Vinyl is back in fashion, Bonita.
but you know, it gets back to culture. They, you know, the reforms of 2016 were not real reforms. They were fiddling around at the edges to do one thing, and that was to satisfy the US and Swiss authorities that they were victims. Let's not forget, FIFA have actually sought compensation in the US courts for the money they've lost. What about the money lost to the grassroots of football worldwide while all of this has been going on? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I come from a first world country that's considered one of the better countries in the world, I think. You know, we have koalas and platypus and that sort of stuff. But we've got kids who can't play the game because, one, it's unaffordable, and two, there's not enough facilities. You know how big our bloody country is? There's not enough facilities. Yet our executives on our football association, they take up about 6% of the revenue. So it's not. So even in a country like ours, which is, and which, by the way, the chairman, the only one of the 25 million people in the country who could take over from the chairman was the chairman's son. But even in a country like ours, there are issues that need to be addressed because, as Greg said, they get to the point where they don't know right from wrong. They become inured to it. And so if there's a line here, and that's right and that's wrong, at the very least, they will put their toe on that line, and most of them are over here and they don't know, and they certainly don't care.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're pretty much out of time. So all that remains is for me to thank you and to present to you your new candidates for the World Football Union when it happens. Mr. Louis Saha, Mr. Philippe Auclair, Ms. Benita Mosiadis and Mr. Greg Dyke. Thank you very much, guys.